birthday presents right here. Here you go.
That's a good birthday present right there. We were just admiring one of Bit's birthday presents.
What is it I can't see? Yahoo Vision.
Can he see or no?
Yeah, he can't see it.
Alright.
Yeah, I'm on Skype.
It is a green label Jack Daniels.
Okay. No, I sound like I'm like bashing on Apple, but I bash on anyone for that. I just consider it. I consider it criminal when you're hindering the ability of students to function in any environment. Sure. So students are supposed to be being trained to do what they're being trained to do, regardless of environment. You know,
Are we recording, by the way?
I just started it back up. So, you know what? I've been drinking a beer the whole time. Feel free to drink your check.
Okay, we'll do one more of my one of my birthday presents. There we go.
The show that sucks does not condone drinking in any way, shape, or form. Drink responsibly, kids. It's like, don't drink till you're 21.
I drink what the hell I want.
Okay, moving on to the Googleplex. God, we were doing the Google vid. We were doing the fun side.
Well, let's wrap up the educational thing. I do think you have a point because, you know, one of Stallman's biggest points is that, you know, code should be like mathematics. It's something that's universal, should be something that's understood that anybody could actually capture. And it is a shame that the services rendered to students and teachers in order to educate do fall into a proprietary status. I mean, that is a reality that we do live into, and if it is something that's educational, it would be nice that we would have software that is not totally exclusive, or if it is on a software package such as iTunes, that iTunes be made to be able to run on Linux platforms.
Well, and you know what? I would honestly argue that Apple does not need to make a Linux version of iTunes. They don't need to do that because iTunes is an application. All they need to do is create an API that lets the marketplace either be accessible through a web page. Or for like the numerous dozen applications I have here where I can just add a marketplace to it. You know, it can phone into that content. That's really all it needs. And you know, at the end of the day, I'd still have to create an Apple account. Apple would still have my credit card. You know, they'd wind up making money off of me. I don't understand why they're so opposed to this.
I don't know if they're opposed to it. I mean, Apple, I still will say, is a very focused on specific things to kind of thing. They're really, from what I know, I've had two friends of mine work at Apple, but these were the old days, like during CyberDog and stuff like that. But I think that they probably would like to. But their resources are such that we'll say, well, you know, we've got this on the roadmap and this on the roadmap, and it's not something like they're quite frankly, they may have a ton of money in the bank, but they are not the size of Microsoft. They are not this huge mammoth that, like Microsoft, that just on a whim just get, you know.
Well, don't take this the wrong way, but this is one of the ways in which I think Apple as a company would benefit tremendously, not by open sourcing, but by opening up enough that I guarantee you there is enough Apple fanatic fans out there that if Apple said, you know what, we don't have the resources to do this, but we're going to open this up enough that y'all can do it for us if you want it. You know.
Well, you know what? I think that may happen. That might happen. I could be wrong. Maybe Commodore can correct me. But iTunes currently is still Carbon based, and I think they're supposed to make a Cocoa version of iTunes. And I think once it's totally pure Cocoa, maybe they will open up an API to iTunes.
Well, I mean, the marketplace could be opened up regardless of the iTunes app.
Well, no, I mean, but the API that lets you into iTunes would be based in Carbon, and if it's to my recollection, it's still based in Carbon. And if that's the case, they've dropped support for Carbon. It's kind of like dropping, they dropped support for the OS 9 Classic and all that other crap that happened over the years, way back in the early 2000s. I think that maybe you do have a damn good chance of saying, well, okay, when iTunes is fully rewritten, kind of like they took Final Cut Pro, and Final Cut Pro is now all Cocoa, like Final Cut 10, that iTunes will follow suit and become pure Cocoa, and that perhaps that they will maybe open up an API once it's at level. But I don't see them doing that until iTunes is pure Cocoa. And for other listeners, basically Cocoa is nothing more than Objective-C, which is just a layer on top of C. Essentially, all your code, anyway, gets translated to C in the end, anyway. So, but the deal of it is
that's the other thing I can't understand, like why it has such an aversion to wanting to run on Linux when it like you're saying, it's still C at the end of the day.
Well, that's because that's how they choose to handle it. There's
well, I would buy your point of view, except for the fact that there are 6 separate occasions where open source people managed to make iTunes work on Linux with Wine.
Yeah, you can. Of course, you can.
No. Literally, like within a short period after they got it working, an update was released that provided no security patches, no additional features, did nothing but break the app again.
Okay, well, of course. I mean, it's still not. But I mean, Apple, of course, has handlers and pointers that have to be in existence for for the security features to even take part. I mean, there's dependencies in the end, right? But let's take Microsoft C#. C# is a language that goes all the way down. It doesn't have to run to my knowledge. It doesn't get interpreted back to C. It's got
no, but I'm not talking.
Objective-C is not that though.
I'm not talking. I'm not talking about any of that. I'm talking about iTunes, which is not designed to work on Linux, is made to run in emulation. It will run and it works, and then Apple releases an update whose sole purpose is to break that compatibility.
I can't buy it. Apple is not out there going, oh my God, somebody just freaking emulated iTunes.
They have done it 6 times. It hasn't been done in
iTunes.
It hasn't been done in recent years because after the 6th time, the open source community goes, fine, we get it, Apple. You don't want it to work over here, we won't make it work.
We get lots of updates for iTunes. I can tell you. I mean, my last damn update came from iTunes on my computer. I mean, they're always freaking updating the dang iTunes. I think maybe they're probably either adhering to new regulatory laws or security holes, that are proof of concepts, maybe that are breaches that they patch, what have you. But I firmly will say that, and I could be wrong. I'll say, I'll eat it if I'm wrong, but I will say that while iTunes is in the Carbon format, they are not going to allow APIs in. However, if it's something that when they make it Cocoa, and I believe,
but again, we're focusing on different things. You're focusing about APIs to allow things to work with iTunes. I'm talking about an API or a hook like that for the iTunes marketplace that will allow it to be accessible by things other than iTunes.
Okay, so you're saying
Amazon. Okay. In other words, if Apple doesn't want to make a Linux or BSD iTunes, they don't have to. I can go to a web page, or I can just add the API call to go, yes, let this marketplace talk to me in basic language. That's not hard to do. That's just going, okay, for those of you who want to give us money, who we're not investing resources in, give us money. You know, that's not.
You want access to the content.
Yes.
Another gateway. Okay.
And honestly, this is not just something users like me would want. There's a number of Windows users. There's a number of Apple users who are like, you know what? I prefer this thing that isn't iTunes, but I still want the iTunes content. I still want to give Apple money. I still want access to the library. I just don't want this piece of shit app.
I see. Okay. You're saying there's like better UIs to handle all the content that comes from iTunes. Okay, well, let me tell you that most of the content that runs in iTunes is essentially a browser that does
exactly, and that's the thing I'm getting at. There is, if Apple can stick that browser wherever they want. As a matter of fact, I wouldn't care if iTunes was a OS X only application. It's not the application that you need, it's the access to the content library. Marketplaces need to be as platform agnostic as is humanly possible, and all that needs to do is you just put an open call on them that goes, here's how you log into this marketplace if you're not using our app.
But the originally this what we're talking about stems from education, and I think that when you use the word API, of course, as a programmer, I'm thinking of how we tap in, and I would say that any application outside.
You know what?
Could you import export to obtain that lecture by exporting out and saying, okay, fine, this education lecture is part of this sandbox, and because we program this API, import export, runs, and you can get the lecture via this application that's written in Linux. It'll take it, make changes, save it, and then export.
And you know what? You're right. I shouldn't use the term API. What I should really use is the term token. Basically, some type of open token system that will allow you to communicate with.
You just want access to their content. You want to have a different UI to access their content. If some Joe Schmo makes a badass media handling application, and it's just a shell, you want to be able to have access to the iTunes content and maybe give a user a better experience in iTunes.
Well, yeah, and at the end of the day, I expect to have to create an Apple account because it is Apple's marketplace to access that content. But all that is a username and password tied to a profile. That does not need to be tied to a specific application.
Well, let's put it this way. I think that'll actually be closer to being hacked when they take iTunes to the cloud. Because there's not much you can do, essentially, technically, as you can locally, when iTunes and your content goes to the cloud.
If iTunes ever goes to the cloud, whether Apple wants that or not, I guarantee you there's going to be an application that's running JavaScript to, as far as iTunes is concerned, this is an OS X computer running everything Apple wants. And there isn't going to be a damn thing they can do about it, because it will say, I am this.
Well, they'll try to find it, but I'm saying they'll be most vulnerable in the cloud.
The reality is that's so manipulatable, it's not even funny. They can try all they want. It's going to be all but impossible to stop.